All right, welcome back. Let's discuss the budget now. The Federal Executive Council has approved a proposed national budget of 47.9 trillion naira for the 2025 fiscal year, following a Federal Executive Council meeting now chaired by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. The Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Atiku Bagudu, who disclosed this to State House correspondents, said the move is part of the medium-term expenditure framework for 2025 to 2027, in line with the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007. Now, according to the minister, the government has pegged the crude oil benchmark at $75 per barrel, with an oil production target of 2.06 million barrels per day. The budget also sets the exchange rate at 1,400 naira per dollar and aims for a gross domestic product rate of 6.4%. Now, the federal government also hinted on its plans to issue foreign currency denominated bonds to help finance the budget deficits. Joining me now to discuss further on this budget is the principal partner, Woodridge and Scott Consulting, Segun Sokoto. Mr. Sokoto, thank you very much for joining us on the program. You look at the parameters, exchange rate pegged at 1,400 naira to the dollar, budget oil benchmark $75 per barrel, and we're hoping to do 2.06 million barrels per day. You look at those parameters, and then the GDP rate at 6.4. You look at all of that. What have you got to say?
Well, This parameters are ambitious, if we're going to be charitable with our choice of words. And I say ambitious because when you compare every single one of those parameters with the current reality, and then you look at our current trajectory, economic trajectory, as a country, you wonder why the government is being so bullish with this parameter. So, for example, if you take the crude oil price benchmark of $75, as we speak today, crude oil is hovering, depending on which one of the crude variants you're looking at, between $69 per barrel to about $78 per barrel. If we're putting our benchmark at 75, we're being extremely optimistic that the crude oil prices will rally over the next year. And global events, especially with the advent, the coming on board of President Trump, would suggest that will not be the case. The majority of energy experts and analysts have, if you look at the different projections, you would arrive at an average of about 65, maybe $68 per barrel for next year. So I think that, fortunately, this is just a proposal. I think the National Assembly will need to take a look at that and ensure that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot and end up with a far bigger deficit than what is currently projected in the budget. That's one. Exchange rate, as we speak today, official rate is about 1,650 naira to the dollar, and we have pegged the exchange rate in the budget to 1,400, which means that the government is basically projecting that exchange rate will improve significantly over the course of the next year. If we take that 1,400 as an average, then we will even be saying that maybe the government is expecting that exchange rate would even fall below that 1,400 threshold for some parts of the year, but steady at around that as an average. Again, if you look at the dynamics within the foreign exchange market as we speak, liquidity on a daily basis, other sources of liquidity into the market, of supply into the market, I wonder where that optimism is coming from. It remains to be seen. And then the crude oil production, daily production benchmark at 2 million, 2.06 million barrels per day, again, is extremely optimistic because as we speak today, we are doing about 1.4 million barrels per day according to OPEC. The government claims that we're doing 1.8, but they continue to add condensate, to the numbers. And the condensate does not factor into our pricing. It's priced at a different rate. So that's a misnomer. So if we're doing 1.4 million barrels per day today, and we're projecting 2.06. What's going to change? What strategies have the government put in place that will guarantee that we can ramp up production on the average for the year 2025 to 2.06 million barrels per day? It's extremely ambitious, and I'm not particularly optimistic that this will happen. So at the end of the day, we're going to end up at the end of that year having racked up significantly higher deficit numbers than what it's already currently in the budget, which is about 13.7 trillion or thereabouts.
Yeah.
So this is not good for planning at all. If we're starting off from the beginning of the planning, getting the parameters wrong, then the entirety of the economy, these numbers are important to corporate finance executives, investment analysts, and all of that. And if we're getting the parameters wrong from the beginning, we're starting up on a very bad footing.
And of course, 6.5 GDP growth rate. I can't imagine. I don't think there was ever a time anyway that we actually met that GDP projection. I mean, the budget projection of the GDP. So GDP at the government now targeting GDP at 6.4%. What do you think?
Again, that's extremely optimistic. Again, we're basically saying we will double what we're currently doing, because we're trending at around 3%, 3.01% GDP growth rate at the moment, which means we're saying that for next year, we're going to double what we're doing. Where's the evidence? All of the parameters, if you look at the inflation and the fact that the CBN continues to increase NPR, which can only help to temper growth, mitigate growth, because the cost of funding and cost of finance is high. Then businesses can't operate, can't secure financing. Retail borrowers cannot get financing to drive consumption. Consumption is likely to be curtailed as a result of continuing to increase monetary policy rates. So the parameters that we have on ground do not necessarily point to very aggressive growth expectations over the next couple of years. So I don't know where they're getting this 6% GDP growth rate from. Power supply, which is a critical driver of economic activity, is still terribly epileptic. The national grid collapses pretty much on a weekly basis now. So the facts on ground do not support even this parameter of GDP growth, and one can only hope that we'll take a second look at this thing and correct that before the budget is approved.
But then there is this other side that I would want you to speak of, and some have said, look, this side is something quite positive. You look at the budget deficit, it has been significantly cut down, and you look at what the government plans to borrow, just around 9 trillion naira.
Yeah. The deficit, the budget deficit issue is a huge headache. Already off the bat, the government is saying we're going to be borrowing 13 trillion naira, to fund this budget. And if you look at all of these parameters,
from what we're gathering, it's supposed to be 9 trillion, and the deficit has been significantly cut down.
Yeah. 9 trillion. We've had conversations over the last few months about the debt burden and the implication of the debt burden on government, the fiscal structure, the fiscal balance of government activities, the fact that debt service obligations are still taking a significant chunk of government revenues, which is preventing government from being able to spend on badly needed infrastructure to drive development. So if we are looking at deficits, in the region of 9 trillion, 10 trillion naira in the current budget, 13 trillion in the proposed budget, that is likely to even be more than that because we're likely to have revenue shortfalls based on these parameters. Then these are dire times. I think that this budget really needs a rework.
Let me ask you one thing that people have always asked. Why is it that, over the years, the budget hardly translates to, our national budget, hardly translates to, better life for the common man on the street. I mean, it hardly translates to, better living standards for the common man on the street. And so for many people, that just find it difficult to make sense of it.
It's a very good question, and it's a question that continues to bother, especially the average man on the street, the average Nigerian. The first thing that we've got to understand is that when we banded these budget numbers in Naira, if you convert it to dollars, we have not increased, our budgets by any significant quantum at
Absolutely.
all over the last 10 years. We've been hovering around $30 billion as our budget number in that time. However, our population has continued to grow at about 3% per annum. As at this year, our population estimate is 230 million Nigerians, and our budget is still about $33 billion. So if you do the budget per capita, we're still trending at about $140, $150 per head. It's simply not enough to drive development that people will feel. The only way people are going to feel development is when they see the infrastructure, the social services that impacts their lives significantly across education sector, across the health sector, transportation infrastructure, power infrastructure. All of these things need massive investment. These budgets are simply not enough. It's inadequate. And the reason it's inadequate is that our revenues are inadequate. The reason our revenues are inadequate is because, there are revenue leakages, significant revenue leakages, revenue that just completely goes unreported, right? I did a quick comparison of budgets per capita across just some peer countries, looking at Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, Egypt. And apart from Ghana, Nigeria is the lowest. South Africa has a budget per capita of around $6,000. Nigeria is $145. It's terrible. Egypt has $600 and something per capita. Kenya, trending around $400 per capita. Those are low numbers, but still they're significantly double or triple what Nigeria is doing. So you can't drive development with budgets that cannot cope with the population, the sheer number of people that budget is supposed to cater for. So one of the only positive that I've seen in this budget number from the government is that they've deliberately attempted to ramp up the number. It's about 60% more than the budget for last year. Unfortunately, it's not only about ramping up the numbers. You've got to make sure that the source of funding for the budget is clearly defined and well articulated, clearly planned. And that, unfortunately, appears not to be the case. But there is no doubt that we need to be spending way more on public services and public infrastructure than we're doing now if the average man on the street is supposed to feel the impact of this spending. Not to talk about the corruption problem, the fact that quite a lot of these monies get added. When organizations like Budget come out with analysis of the budget breakdown, you find that a lot of this money just disappears. So that's another problem on its own. So it's a mix-up of all of these issues.
And I just think it's important to emphasize what you said, that you look at the budget now in dollar terms. Nothing has really changed. So what we're talking about here is just around $28 billion. Not different from what we budgeted last year, the year before, and previously. So in dollar terms, nothing has really changed. Mr. Segun Sokoton, thank you very much for coming on the program, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, as always.
I appreciate it. Well, that was Segun Sokoton. That's the principal partner, Woodridge and Scott Consulting, a company based here in Lagos. Well, that's how much we can take on the program this week. Well, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.